Hey, everybody. Hello, good afternoon. Good afternoon. It's 12 p.m. where I am. Hi, Janae is here. I am back. I am here. I just finished taking selfies. Y'all like taking selfies? I took a few and I changed the background. So I'm here, y'all. Here, I'll show you. I guess I can show you this one. Can you see that? Oh, you can't see the background though. There it is. You can kind of see it. I was taking selfies and changing the background. But that's not why I'm here live. I'm here because I am reading this book. It's called Alice's Adventure in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. So Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. So I am on chapter 8. This is where I left off. The last time, the Queen's Croquette Ground. So that's where I am going to begin. The last time I read, we know Alice kept going through different changes from large to small, and she was in different settings, and she is not very happy about going through those changes from being large to being really small. So now we are finally through the doors and we are finally in the most beautiful garden. And there's flower beds and there's cool fountains. And so that is where the Queen's Croquette Ground is. So that is where we will begin. So again, taking a look at the picture, you can see flowers. They're in the garden there. And then you know the Queen, right? Just think like the Queen, like in a deck of cards. So that is what we are referring to. Shall we begin? Y'all ready? Feel free to type in the chat. You can say hello. You can ask a question. I will start by simply saying hello. Let me know you're here. Share your name, where you're from, all that jazz. If you have the book, you can turn to page 69. So that's chapter 8. All right, let's get started. A large rose tree stood near the entrance of the garden. The roses growing on it were white, but there were 3 gardeners at it, busily painting them red. Alice thought this a very curious thing, and she went nearer to watch them. And just as she came up to them, she heard one of them say, "Look out now, 5. Don't go splashing paint over me like that." "I couldn't help it," said 5 in a sulky tone. 7 jogged my elbow, on which 7 looked up and said, "That's right, 5. Always lay the blame on others." "You'd better not talk," said 5. "I heard the Queen say only yesterday you deserve to be beheaded." "What for?" said the one who had spoken first. "That's none of your business." 2, said 7. "Yes, it is my business," said 5. "And I'll tell him it was for bringing the cook tulip roots instead of onions." So here we have cards that are arguing back and forth. And if you look at the picture, you can see that this one is 5, the one that has 5 spades. And then This one is 7. And then this one is going to be 2. So they are arguing back and forth. They're painting. One bumps the other. You can see 5 is holding the pail of paint. And he doesn't look very happy. So they're just kind of going back and forth. And you can see 2 is kind of like in the background. Like he's not really, he's there, but it's almost like 5 and 7 are kind of going at it. And then 2 is just like dipping in the flavor. Okay. So we have here what happened. So 7 looked up and said, that's right. 5 always lays the blame on others. So 7 is basically saying that 5 does the blaming. And then he said, you better not talk, 5. I heard the queen say yesterday, you deserve to be beheaded. So 5 was the one that brought the tulip roots instead of the onions. And I hope this is good enough for y'all. And then 2 tries to jump in. And 7's like, no one's talking to you. All right, let's just keep reading, shall we? So 7 flung down his brush and had just begun. Well, of all the unjust things, when his eyes chanced to fall open, Alice, as she stood watching them, and he checked himself suddenly. The others looked round also, and all of them bowed low. Would you tell me, please, said Alice, and a little timidly, why you are painting those roses? 5 and 7 said nothing, but looked at 2. 2 began in a low voice. Why, the fact is, you see, miss, this here ought to have been a red rose tree, and we put a white one in by mistake. And if the queen was to find out, we should all have our heads cut off, you know? So you see, miss, we're doing our best afore she comes to. At this moment, 5, who had been anxiously looking across the garden, called out, the queen, the queen! And the 3 gardeners instantly threw themselves flat on their faces. There was a sound of many footsteps, and Alice looked around eager to see the queen. First came 10 soldiers carrying clubs. Those were all shaped like the 3 gardeners, oblong and flat, and their hands and feet at the corners next to 10 courtiers. These were ornaments all over the diamonds, and walked 2 and 2 as the soldiers did. After these came the royal children. There were 10 of them, and the little dears came jumping merrily along, hand in hand in couples. They were all ornamented with hearts. Next came the guests, mostly kings and queens, and among them Alice recognized the white rabbit. It was talking in a hurriedly nervous manner, smiling at everything that was said, and went by without noticing her. Then followed the knave of hearts, carrying the king's crown on a crimson velvet cushion. And last of all, the grand procession came the king and the queen of hearts. Alice was rather doubtful whether she ought to lie down on her face like the 3 gardeners, but she could not remember even having heard of such a rule at procession. And besides, what would be the use of a procession, thought she. If people had all to lie down on their faces so that they couldn't see it. So she stood there. She stood where she was and waited. When the procession came opposite to Alice, they all stopped and looked at her. And the queen said severely, "Who is this?" She said it to the knave of hearts, who only bowed and smiled in reply. "Idiot," said the queen, tossing her head impatiently, and turning to Alice, she went on, "What's your name, child?" "My name is Alice, so please, your majesty," said Alice very politely. But she added to herself, "Why, there are only a pack of cards. After all, I needn't be afraid of them." "And who are these?" said the queen, pointing to the three gardeners who were lying round the rose tree. For you see, as they were lying on their faces, and the pattern on their backs was the same as the rest of the pack. She could not tell whether they were gardeners or soldiers or courtiers or three of her own children. "How should I know?" said Alice, surprised at her own courage. "It's no business of mine." The queen turned crimson with fury, and after glaring at her for a moment like a wild beast, began screaming, "Off with your head! Off with—" "Nonsense," said Alice very loudly and decidedly, and the queen was silent. The king laid his hand upon her arm and timidly said, "Consider, my dear, she is only a child." The queen turned angrily away from him and said to the knave, "Turn them over." The knave did so very carefully with one foot. "Get up," said the queen in a shrill, loud voice, and the three gardeners instantly jumped up and began bowing to the king and queen, the royal children, and everybody else. "Leave off that," screamed the queen. "You make me giddy." And then turning to the rose tree, she went on, "What have you been doing here?" "May I please your majesty," said Two in a very humble tone, going down on one knee as he spoke. "We were trying—" "I see," said the queen, who had meanwhile been examining the roses. "Off with their heads!" And the procession moved on, three of the soldiers remaining behind to execute the unfortunate gardeners, who ran to Alice for protection. "You shouldn't be beheaded," said Alice, and she put them into a large flower pot that stood near. The three soldiers wandered about for a minute or two looking for them, and then quietly marched off after the others. "Are their heads off?" shouted the queen. "Their heads are gone, if it please your majesty," the soldiers shouted in reply. "That's right," shouted the queen. "Can you play croquet?" The soldiers were silent and looked at Alice, as the question was evidently meant for her. "Yes," shouted Alice. "Come on then," roared the queen, and Alice joined the procession, wondering very much what would happen next. So I want to show you this picture really quick. This is a picture of the queen, and she's pointed at Alice, and she's like, "Who are you?" And so down below, you can see cards laying flat. So like this one and this one and this one. And you can see like they look the same. She's just like, "And who are they?" Like what? And I thought it was funny because they was like, they could be like her children. They could be, the gardeners. They could be pretty much a lot of different people. It was just hard to tell who they were. Yeah. So I'm going to finish the reading. I'm on the next page now. It's a very fine day, said a timid voice at her side. She was walking by the white rabbit, who was peeping anxiously into her face. Very, said Alice. Where's the Duchess? Hush, hush, said the rabbit in a low, hurried tone. He looked anxiously over his shoulder as he spoke, and then raised himself upon tiptoe, put his mouth close to her ear, and whispered, She's under sentence of execution. What for? Said Alice. Did you say, what a pity? The rabbit asked. No, I didn't, said Alice. I don't think it's at all a pity, I said. What for? She boxed the queen's ears. The rabbit began. Alice gave a little scream of laughter. Oh, hush, the rabbit whispered in a frightened tone. The queen will hear you. You see, she came rather late. And the queen said, Get to your places, shouted the queen in a voice of thunder, and the people began running about in all directions, tumbling up against each other. However, they got settled down in a minute or two, and the game began. Alice thought she had never seen such a curious croquet ground in her life. It was all ridges and furrows. The croquet balls were living hedgehogs, and the mallets live from flamingos, and the soldiers had to double themselves up and stand on their hands and feet to make the arches. The chief difficulty Alice found at first was managing her flamingo. She succeeded in getting its body tucked away comfortably enough under her arm with its legs hanging down, but generally, just as she had got its neck nicely tightened out and was going to give the hedgehog a blow with its head, it would twist itself round and look up in her face with a puzzled expression that she could not help but bursting out laughing. And when she had got its head down and was going to begin again, it was very provoking to find that the hedgehog had unrolled itself and was in act of crawling away. Besides all this, there was generally a ridge or a furrow in the way whenever she wanted to send the hedgehog to. And as the doubled up soldiers were always getting up and walking off to their parts of the ground, Alice soon came to the conclusion that it was a very difficult game indeed. The players all at once, without waiting for turns, quarreling all the while and fighting for the hedgehogs. And in a very short time, the queen was in a furious passion and went stamping about and shouting, Off with his head, or off with her head. About once in a minute, Alice began to feel very uneasy. To be sure, she had not as yet had any dispute with the queen, but she knew that it might happen any minute. And then thought she, what will become of me? They're dreadfully fond of beheading people here. The great wonder is that's anyone left alive. She was looking about for some way of escape and wondering whether she could get away without being seen. When she noticed a curious appearance in the air, it puzzled her very much at first, but after watching it a minute or two, she made it out to be a grin, and she said to herself, "It's the Cheshire Cat. Now I shall have somebody to talk to." "How are you getting on?" said the cat, as soon as there was mouth enough for it to speak with. Alice waited till the eyes appeared and then nodded. "It's no use speaking to it," she thought, "till its tears have come, or at least one of them." In another minute, the whole head appeared, and Alice put down her flamingo and began on account of the game, feeling glad she had someone to listen to her. The cat seemed to think that there was enough of it now in sight, and no more of it appeared. "I don't think they play at all fairly," Alice began, in rather a complaining tone. "And they're all queerly, so dreadfully, one can't hear oneself speak, and they don't seem to have any rules in particular, at least. If there are, nobody attends to them, and you've no idea how confusing it is, all the things being alive. For instance, there's the arch I've got to go through, next walking about at the other end of the ground, and I should have croquet the queen's hedgehog just now, only it ran away when it saw mine coming. How do I like the queen? How do you like the queen?" said the cat in a low voice. "Not at all," said Alice. "She's so extremely—" Just then she noticed that the queen was close behind her, listening. So she went on, "Likely to win. It's hardly worthwhile finishing the game." The queen smiled and passed on. "Who were you talking to?" said the king, coming up to Alice and looking at the cat's head with great curiosity. "It's a friend of mine, a Cheshire cat," said Alice. "Allow me to introduce it." "I don't like the look of it all," said the king. "However, it may kiss my hand if it likes." "I'd rather not," the cat remarked. "Don't be impertinent," said the king, "and don't look at me like that." He got behind Alice as he spoke. "A cat may look at a king," said Alice. "I've read that in some books, but I don't remember where." "Well, it must be removed," said the king very decidedly, and he called to the queen, who was passing at the moment. "My dear, I wish you would have this cat removed." The queen had only one way of settling all difficulties, great or small. "Off with this head," she said, without even looking around. "I'll fetch the executioner myself." The king said the king eagerly, and he hurried off. Alice thought she might as well go back and see how the game was going on, as she heard the queen's voice in the distance, screaming with passion. She had already heard her sentence. She has already heard her sentence. 3 of the players to be executed for having missed their turns, and she did not like the look of things at all, as the game was in such confusion that she never knew whether it was her turn or not. So she went off in search of her hedgehog. The hedgehog was engaged in a fight with another hedgehog, which seemed to Alice an excellent opportunity for croqueting one of them with the other. The only difficulty was that the flamingo was gone across to the other side of the garden, where Alice could see it, trying in a helpless sort of way to fly up into a tree. By the time she had caught the flamingo and brought it back, the fight was over, and both the hedgehogs were out of sight. But it doesn't matter much, thought Alice, as all the arches are gone from this side of the ground. So she tucked it away under her arm that it might not escape again, and went back to have a little more conversation with her friend. When she got back to the Cheshire Cat, she was surprised to find quite a large crowd collected around it. There was a dispute going on between the executioner, the king, and the queen, who were all talking at once, while all the rest were quite silent and looked very uncomfortable. The moment Alice appeared, she was appealed to by all three to settle the question, and repeated their arguments to her. Though as they all spoke at once, she found it very hard to make out exactly what they said. The executioner's argument was that you couldn't cut off a head unless there was a body to cut it off from. That he had never had to do such a thing before, and he wasn't going to begin at his time of life. The king's argument was that anything that had a head could be beheaded, and that you weren't to talk nonsense. The queen's argument was that if something wasn't done about it in less than no time, she'll have everybody executed all around. It was this last remark that had made the whole party look so grave and anxious. Alice could think of nothing else to say but, "It belongs to Duchess. You'd better ask her about it." "She's in prison," the queen said the executioner. "Fetch her here." The executioner went off like an arrow. The cat's head began fading away the moment he was gone, and by the time he had come back with the Duchess, it had entirely disappeared. So the king and the executioner ran wildly up and down looking for it, while the rest of the party went back to the game. So this is a picture of the cat that's getting ready to disappear. And then you see the king. And then there's also the queen. I think that's the queen. Yeah, that's the queen. And then that's the executioner with the club. So that's the executioner. Do you see the queen? There's the queen. Off with their heads! Off with their heads! I love that part. All right, so the next chapter is going to be 9. I'm just confirming this. It's in Roman numeral numbers, so I like to count through. So we are on chapter 9. It's the Mock Turtle story. And then this is on page 78. So if you have your book, you're just jumping on. This is what I'm reading, Alice's Adventure in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. And so I'm on page 78. So this is chapter 9, page 78. So you're welcome to join the Mock Turtle story. Off with their heads! Chapter 9, the Mock Turtle story. You can't think how glad I am to see you again. You dear old thing, said the Duchess, as she tucked her arm affectionately into Alice's, and they walked off together. Alice was very glad to find her in such a pleasant temper, and thought to herself that perhaps it was only the pepper that had made her so savage when they met in the kitchen. When I'm a duchess, she said to herself, not in a very hopeful tone, though, I won't have any pepper in my kitchen at all. Soup does very well without. Maybe it's always pepper that makes people hot tempered, she went on, very much pleased at having found out a new kind of rule, and vinegar that makes them sour, and chamomile that makes them bitter. Chamomile that makes them bitter, and barley sugar, and such things that make children sweet tempered. I only wish people knew that. Then wouldn't be so stingy about it. She had quite forgotten the Duchess by this time, and was a little startled when she heard her voice close to her ear. You're thinking about something, my dear, and that makes you forget to talk. I can't tell you just now what the moral of that is, but I shall remember it in a bit. Perhaps it hasn't one, Alice ventured to remark. Tut, tut, child, said the Duchess. Everything's got a moral. A moral? If only you can find it. And she squeezed herself up to Alice's side as she spoke. Alice's side as she spoke. Alice did not much like her keeping so close to her. First, because the Duchess was very ugly. And secondly, because she was exactly the right height to the rest of her chin on Alice's shoulder. And it was uncomfortably sharp chin. However, she did not like to be rude, so she bore it as well as she could. So I want to show you the Duchess. The Duchess! The Duchess! Because I know like the cat talks about the Duchess a lot. There's the Duchess. Right by Alice. The game's going on rather better now, she said, by way of keeping up the conversation a little. Tis. So, said the Duchess, and the moral of that is, oh, tis love, that makes the world go round, somebody said. Alice whispered, that it doesn't, that it does by everybody minding their own business. Ah, well, it means much the same thing, said the Duchess, digging her sharp little chin into Alice's shoulder, as she added, and the moral of that is, take care of the sense, and the sound will take care of themselves. How fond she is of finding morals in things, Alice thought to herself. I dare say you are wondering why I don't put my arm around your waist, the Duchess said. After a pause, the reason is that I'm doubtful about the temper of your flamingos. Shall I try the experiment? He might bite, Alice cautiously replied, not feeling at all anxious to have the experiment tried. Very true, said the Duchess. Flamingos and mustard both bite. And the moral of that is, birds of a feather flock together. Only mustard isn't a bird, Alice remarked. Right. And unusual, said the Duchess. What a clear way you have of putting things. It's a mineral, I think, said Alice. Of course it is, said the Duchess, who seemed ready to agree to everything that Alice said. There's a large mustard, mine near here, and the moral of that is, The more there is of mine, the less there is of yours." "Oh, I know," exclaimed Alice, who had not attended to this last remark. "It's a vegetable. It doesn't look like one, but it is." "I quite agree with you," said the Duchess. "And the moral of that is, be what you would seem to be, or, if you'd like it, put more simply, never imagine yourself not to be otherwise than what it might appear to others, that what you were or might have been was not otherwise than what you had been would have appeared to them to be otherwise." "I think I should understand that better," Alice said very politely, "if I had it written down, but I can't quite follow it as you say it. There's nothing to do what I could say if I chose," the Duchess replied, in a pleased tone. "Pray don't trouble yourself to say it any longer than that," said Alice. "Oh, don't talk about trouble," said the Duchess. "I make present of everything. I said, as yet." "A cheap sort of present," thought Alice. "I'm glad people don't give birthday presents like that." But she did not venture to say it out loud. "Thinking again?" the Duchess asked, with another dig in her sharp little chin. "I've a right to think," said Alice sharply, for she was beginning to feel a little worried. "Just about as much right," said the Duchess, "as pigs have to fly. And the But there, to Alice's great surprise, the Duchess' voice died away, even in the middle of her favorite word, moral, and the arm that was linked into hers began to tremble. Alice looked up, and there stood the Queen in front of them, with her arms folded, frowning like a thunderstorm. "A fine day, Your Majesty," the Duchess began in a low, weak voice. "Now, I give you fair warning," shouted the Queen, stomping on the ground as she spoke. "Either you and your head must be off, and that in about half no time. Take your choice." The Duchess took her choice and was gone in a moment. "Let's go on with the game. Let's go on with the game," the Queen said to Alice, and Alice was too much frightened to say a word, but slowly followed her back to the croquet ground. The other guests had taken advantage of the Queen's absence and were resting in the shade. However, the moment they saw her, they hurried back to the game, the Queen merely remarking that a moment delay would cost them their lives. All the time they were playing, the Queen never left off quarreling with the other players and shouting, "Off with their heads!" or "Off with her head!" So those whom she sentenced were taken into custody by the soldiers, who, of course, had to leave off being archers to do this, so that by the end of half an hour or so, there were no archers left, and all the players except the king and queen, and Alice was in custody and under sentence of execution. Then the queen left off, quite out of breath, and said to Alice, "Have you seen Mock the turtle yet?" "No," said Alice. "I don't even know what mock turtle is." "It's the thing mock turtle soup is made from," said the queen. "I never saw one." "Or heard of one," said Alice. "Come on, then," said the queen, "and he shall tell you his story." As they followed off together, Alice heard the king say in a low voice to the company general, "You are all pardoned. Come, that's a good thing," she said to herself, for she had felt quite unhappy at the number of executions the queen had ordered. They very soon came upon a griffon lying fast asleep in the sun. If you don't know what a griffon is, look at the picture. Up, lazy thing, said the queen. Take this young lady to see the mock turtle and hear his story. I must go back to see after some executions I have ordered. And she walked off, leaving Alice alone with the griffon. Alice did not quite like the look of the creature, but on the whole, she thought it would be quite as safe to stay with it as to go after that savage queen, so she waited. The griffon sat up and rubbed his eyes. Then it watched the queen till it was out of sight. Then it chuckled. What fun, said the griffon, half to itself, half to Alice. Why, she, said the griffon. It's all her fancy that they never executed nobody, you know? Come on. Everybody says, come on here, thought Alice, and she went slowly after it. I never was so ordered about before in all my life. Never. They had not gone far before they saw the mock turtle in the distance, sitting sad and lonely on the little edge of a rock. And as they came nearer, Alice could hear him sighing as if his heart would break. She pitied him deeply. What is his sorrow? She asked the griffon, and the griffon answered very nearly in the same words as before. It's all his fancy that he hasn't got no sorrow, you know. Come on. So they went up to the mock turtle and looked at him and looked at them with large eyes full of tears, but said nothing. This here young lady, said the griffon, she wants to know your history. She do. I'll tell it to her, said Mock Turtle in a deep, hollow tone. I'll tell it to her, said the turtle in a deep, hollow tone. Sit down, both of you, and don't speak a word till I've finished. So they sat down, and nobody spoke for some minutes. Alice thought to herself, I don't see how he could ever finish if he doesn't begin. She waited patiently. Once, said the mock turtle at last, with a deep sigh, I was a real turtle. These words were followed by a very long silence, broken only by an occasional exclamation of Hajaker from the griffon and the constant heavy sobbing of Mock Turtle. Alice was very nearly getting up to say, Thank you, sir, for your interesting story. But she could not help but thinking there must be more to come. So she sat still and said nothing. When we were turtles, the Mock Turtle went on at last, more commonly, though still sobbing a little now and then. We went to school in the sea. The monster was an old turtle. The monster was an old turtle. We used to call him Tortoise. Why did you call him Tortoise if he wasn't one? Alice asked. We called him Tortoise because he taught us, said the Mock Turtle angrily. Really, you are very dull. You ought to be ashamed of yourself for asking such a simple question, added Gryphon. And then they both sat silent and looked at poor Alice, who felt ready to sink into the earth. At last the Gryphon said to the Mock Turtle, "Drive on, old fellow. Don't be all day about it." And he went on in these words, "Yes, we went to school in the sea. Though you mayn't believe it." "I never said I didn't," interrupted Alice. "You did," said the Mock Turtle. "Hold your tongue," added the Gryphon before Alice could speak again. The Mock Turtle went on. "We had the best of education. In fact, we went to school every day." "I've been to school. I've been to a day-to-day school. I've been to a day school too," said Alice. "You needn't be so proud as all that." "With extras?" asked the Mock Turtle. "With extras?" asked the Mock Turtle a little anxiously. "Yes," said Alice. "We learned French and music." "And washing?" said the Mock Turtle. "Certainly not," said Alice indignantly. "Ah, then yours wasn't really a really good school," said the Mock Turtle in a tone of great relief. "No, at ours they had, at the end of the bill, French, music, and washing extra." "You couldn't have wanted it much," said Alice. "Living at the bottom of the sea?" "I couldn't afford to learn it," said the Mock Turtle with a sigh. "I only took the regular course." "What was that?" inquired Alice. "Reeling and reefing, of course, to begin with," the Mock Turtle replied. "And then the different branches of arithmetic: ambition, distraction, uglification, and derision." "I never heard of uglification," Alice ventured to say. "What is it?" The Gryphon lifted up both paws in surprise. "Never heard of uglifying," it exclaimed. "You know what to beautify is, I suppose." "Yes," said Alice doubtfully. "It means to make anything prettier." "Well then," the Gryphon went on, "if you don't know what to uglify is, you are a simpleton." Alice did not feel encouraged to ask any more questions about it, so she turned to the Mock Turtle and said, "What else had you to learn?" "Well, there was majesty," the Mock Turtle replied, "counting off the subjects on his flappers. Mystery ancient and modern with seagography. And drawlings. The drawlings master was old Conquer Eel, that used to come once a week. He taught us drawlings, sketchings, and feigning in coils." "What was that like?" asked Alice. "Well, I can't show it myself," the Mock Turtle said. "I'm too stiff, and the Gryphon never learned it." "Hadn't time," said the Gryphon. "I went to the classical master, though. He was an old crab, he was." "I never went to him," the Mock Turtle said with a sigh. "He taught laughing and grief, they used to say." "So he did, so he did," said the Grapevine, sighing in his turn, and both creatures hid their faces in their paws. "And now, how many hours a day did you do lessons?" said Alice, in a hurry to change the subject. 10 hours the first day," said the Mock Turtle. 9 the next, and so on. "What a curious plan," exclaimed Alice. "That's the reason they are called lessons," the Grapevine remarked, "because they lesson from day to day. Because they listen from day to day." This was quite a new idea, Alice, and she thought it over a little before she made her next remark. Then the 11th day must have been a holiday. "Of course it was," said the Mock Turtle. "And how did you manage it on the 12th?" "And how did you manage it on the 12th?" Alice went on eagerly. "That's enough about lessons," the Grapevine interrupted in a very decided tone. "Tell her something about the games now." So now I'm on chapter 10, and chapter 10 is called The Lobster Quadrille. The Mock Turtle sighed deeply and drew the back one flapper across his eye. He looked at Alice and tried to speak, but for a minute or two, sobs choked his voice. "Same as if he had a bone in his throat," said the Grapevine, and it set to work shaking him and punching him in the back. At last, the Mock Turtle covered his voice, and with his tears running down his cheeks, he went on again. "You may not have lived much under the sea." "I haven't," said Alice. "And perhaps you never introduced to a lobster." Alice began to say, "I once tasted," but checked herself hastily and said, "No, never." "So you have no idea what a delightful thing a lobster quadrille is." "No, indeed," said Alice. "What sort of dance is it?" "Why," said the Grapevine. "Why," said the Grapevine, "you first form into a line along the seashore." "2 lines?" cried the Mock Turtle. "Seals, turtles, salmon, and so on. Then, when you've cleared all the jellyfish out of the way—" "That generally takes some time," interrupted the Grapevine. "You advance twice, each time with the lobster as a partner," cried the Grapevine. "Of course," the Mock Turtle said. "Advance twice. Set to partners. Change lobsters. Retire in the same order," continued the Grapevine. "Then, you know," the Mock Turtle went on, "you throw the lobsters," shouted the Grapevine with a bound into the air, "as far as to the sea you can." "Swim after them," screamed the Grapevine. "Turn a somersault into the sea," cried the Mock Turtle, capering wildly about. "Change lobsters again." "Change lobsters again," yelled the Grapevine at the top of his voice. "Back to the land again, and that's all the first figure," said the Mock Turtle, suddenly dropping his voice at the two creatures who had been jumping about like mad things all this time, sat down again, with sadly and quietly and looked at Alice. It must be a very pretty dance, said Alice timidly. Would you like to see a little of it? Said the Mock Turtle. Very much indeed, said Alice. Come, let us try the first figure, said the Mock Turtle to the Gryphon. We can do it without lobsters, you know. Which shall sing? Oh, you sing, said the Gryphon. I've forgotten words. So they began solemnly dancing round and round Alice, every now and then tending on her toes when they passed too close, and waving their fore paws to mark the time, while the Mock Turtle sang this very slowly and sadly. Will you walk a little faster? Said a whistling to a snail. There's a porpoise close behind us, and he's trending on my tail. See how eagerly the lobster and the turtles all advance. They are waiting on the shingle. Will you come and join the dance? Will you, won't you? Will you, won't you? Will you join the dance? Will you, won't you? Will, won't you? Will you join the dance? You can really have no notion how delighted it will be. Will they take us up and throw us with the lobsters out to sea? But the snail replied, too far, and gave a look advance. She thanked the whiting kindly, but he would not join the dance. Would not, could not, would not, could not, would not join the dance. Would not, could not, would not, could not join the dance. What matters, it's how far we go, he scarcely friend replied. There is another shore, you know, upon the other side. The further off from England, the nearer is to France. Then turned, not pale, beloved snail, but come and join the dance. Will you, won't you? Will you, won't you? Will you join the dance? Will you, won't you? Will you, won't you? Will you join the dance? Thank you. It's very interesting dance to watch, said Alice, feeling very glad that it was over at last. And I do so like that curious song about whitening. Oh, as to the whitening, said the Mock Turtle. You've seen them, of course. Yes, Alice said. I've often seen them at dine. She checked herself hastily. I don't know where din may be, said the Mock Turtle, but if you've seen them so often, of course you know what they're like. I believe so, Alice replied thoughtfully. They have their tails in their mouths, and they're all over crumbs. You're wrong about the crumbs, said the Mock Turtle. Crumbs would all wash off the sea, but they have their tails in their mouths, and the reason is— Here the Mock Turtle yawned and shut his eyes. Tell her about the reason and all that, he said to the grapevine. The reason is, said the grapevine. The reason is, said the grapevine, that they will go with the lobsters to the dance. So they got thrown out to sea. So they had to fall away a long way. So they got their tails fast in their mouths. So they couldn't get them out again. That's all. Thank you, said Alice. It's very interesting. I never knew so much about a whiting before. I can tell you more than that if you like, said the grapevine. Do you know why it's called a whiting? I never thought about that, said Alice. Why? It does the boots and shoes, said the grapevine, replied very solemnly. Alice was thoroughly puzzled. Does the boots and shoes? She repeated in a wondering tone. Why? What are your shoes done with? Said the grapevine. I mean, what makes them so shiny? Alice looked down at them and considered a little before she gave her answer. They're done with blacking, I believe. Boots and shoes under the sea, the grapevine went on in a deep voice, are done with whiting. Now you know. And what are they made of? Alice asked in a tone of great curiosity. Soles and eels, of course, the grapevine replied, rather impatiently. Any shrimp could have told you that. If it'd been the whiting, said Alice, whose thoughts were still running on the song, I'd have said to the porpoise, keep back, please. We don't want you with us. They were obliged to have him with them. The mock turtle said, no wish fish will go anywhere without a porpoise. Wouldn't it really? Said Alice in a tone of great surprise. Of course not, said the mock turtle. Why, if a fish came to me and told me he was going a journey, I would say, with what purpose? Don't you mean purpose? Said Alice. I mean what I say, the mock turtle replied in an offended tone, and the grapevine added, come, let's hear some of your adventures. I could tell you my adventures beginning from this morning, said Alice, a little timidly, but it's no use of going back to yesterday because I was a different person then. Explain all that, said the mock turtle. No, the adventures first, said the grapevine in an impatient tone. Explanations take such a dreadful time. So Alice began telling them her adventures from the time she first saw a white rabbit. She was a little nervous about it. Just at first, the two creatures got so close to her, one on each side, and opened her eyes and mouth so very wide. But she gained courage as she went on. Her listeners were perfectly quiet till she got to the part about her repeating, you are old, Father William, to the caterpillar, and the words all coming different. And the mock turtle drew a long breath and said, that's very curious. It's all about it's all about as curious as it can be, said the grapevine. It all came different, the mock turtle repeated thoughtfully. I should like to hear her try and repeat something now. Tell her to begin. He looked at the grapevine as if they thought it had some kind of authority over Alice. Stand up and repeat. 'Tis the voice of the sluggard, said the grapevine. How the creatures ordered one about and make one repeat lessons, thought Alice. I might just well be at school at once. However, she got up and began to repeat it, but her head was so full of lobster quadrille that she hardly knew what she was saying, and the words came very queer indeed. "'Tis the voice of the lobster," I heard him declare. "You have baked me too brown, I must sugar my hair. As a duck with its eyelids, so he was his nose. So he with his nose trims his belt and his buttons and turns out his toes. When the sands are all dry, he is gray as a lark, and will talk in contemptuous tones of the shark. But when the tide rises and the sharks are around, his voice has a timid and tremulous sound. That's different from what I used to say when I was a child," said the Gryphon. "Will I never be heard before?" "Well, I never heard it before," said the Mock Turtle, "but it sounds uncommon nonsense." Alice said nothing. She sat down with her face in her hands, wondering if anything would ever happen in a natural way again. "I should like to have it explained," said the Mock Turtle. "She can't explain it," said the Gryphon hastily. "Go on with the next verse." "But about his toes," the Mock Turtle persisted. "How could he turn them out with his nose, you know?" "It's the first position in dancing," Alice said. But she was dreadfully puzzled by the whole thing and longed to change the subject. "Go on with the verse," the Gryphon repeated. "It begins, 'I passed by his garden.'" Alice did not dare to disobey. Though she felt sure it would all come wrong, she went on in a trembling voice. "I passed by the garden and marked with one eye how the owl and the panther were sharing a pie. The panther took pie crust and gravy and meat, while the owl had a dish as its share of the treat. When the pie was all finished, the owl, as the boon, was kindly permitted to pocket the spoon, while the panther received knife and fork with a growl and concluded the banquet by, 'What is the use of repeating all that stuff?'" "What is the use of repeating all that stuff?" the Mock Turtle interrupted. "If you don't explain it as you go on, it's by far the most confusing thing I ever heard." "Yes, I think you better leave off," said the Gryphon, and Alice was only too glad to do so. "Shall we try another figure of lobster quadrille?" the Gryphon went on. "Or would you like the Mock Turtle to sing you another song?" "Oh, a song! If the Mock Turtle would be so kind," Alice replied, so eagerly that the Gryphon said in a rather offended tone, "No accounting for taste. Sing her turtle soup, will you, old fella?" The Mock Turtle sighed deeply. "Oh," and began in a voice choked with sobs to sing. "Beautiful soup, so rich and so green, waiting in a hot tureen. Who for such dainties would not stoop? Soup of evenings, beautiful soup. Soup of evening, beautiful soup. Beautiful soup. Beautiful soup, soup of the evening, beautiful, beautiful soup, beautiful soup. Who cares for fish
game, or any other dish. Who would not give all else for 2p? Any worth only a beautiful soup. Penny worth only a beautiful soup. Beautiful soup. Beautiful soup. Soup of the evening. Beautiful, beautiful soup.
Course again, cried the Gryphon. The Mark Turtle had just begun to repeat. When a cry of trials began, we heard in a distance, "Come on," cried the Gryphon, and said, and taking Alice by the hand, it hurried off without waiting for the end of the song. "What trial is it?" Alice panted as she ran, and the Gryphon only answered, "Come on," and ran faster, while more and more faintly came, carried on the breeze that followed them, the melancholy words,
Soup of the evening, beautiful, beautiful soup.
And so that's the end. And so now I'm on chapter 10, and chapter 10 is the stole of tarts. The stole of, who stole the tarts? Who stole the tarts is the next one. That's chapter 10. So I am going to stop there. I think it's good to stop with the song. It made me feel really calm. And so we're just going to end the video. But thank y'all for watching. Thank you so much. Again, we're stopping on chapter 10, page 95. So if you have your books, mark your pages. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye.